We're here.
All right, very good. So this is very exciting. It could be, maybe our last Zoom of the year, maybe not of the year, but definitely our last Zoom of the summer. So it's kind of exciting that we're doing it with the champagne. I think that's one of those words, champagne, that it's recognizable probably by anyone everywhere in the world. And maybe everybody celebrates with the bubble of champagne, and it definitely evokes luxurious thoughts, but not many people know. I know you are crafted, hopefully with our help, and you do, but Champagne really is just a region in France where the Champagne wine comes from. So any other wine that doesn't come from Champagne, even though sparkling, it's not considered champagne. And we know that most people, even when they come to the store, they would ask for champagne and they don't really mean it. They just want a sparkling wine, and in many occasions they think of Prosecco even, which is a very particular name too, or Cava, or any other sparkling wine, even from France, that could be made in Loire Valley. It's not considered champagne. I think that, in my opinion, one of the most interesting factors about champagne is that champagne was produced, during the Roman times, but it was produced as still wine, and it wasn't sparkling at all. Or if it was sparkling, all the champenois were trying to actually do everything in their power to not have bubbles in their wine. And I believe not till 18th century that they finally came to terms that bubbles are good, and they actually separate their wines from other wines. And with the help of the British that really purchased a lot of champagne, but they requested them to have bubbles, as well as the French kings that preferred the sparkle in the wine. The champagne houses started to make wines that were actually sparkling wines. So I think for me, the fact that they didn't want the bubbles, and now what separates the champagne from others, because in the 19th and not till I think beginning of 20th century, other houses, seeing success of champagne, started to make sparkling wines. So before, nobody else had wine with bubbles. What we also think of champagne, I think, is that besides luxurious and celebratory, champagne is extremely expensive. It definitely, again, in 20th century, it became more common, so more people can afford it, but it really was reserved, in a sense, for elite and for the ruling class, from starting with the clergy through Napoleon, French kings, also Churchill was a lover of champagne. But what makes it so expensive is not only the northern climate that champagne is at, it's the most northern area of France and Europe to make wine. It's also complex geology, and everything to make the actual bubbles is extremely time consuming and expensive. And there are probably more laws governing how to produce champagne than anywhere else in the world, including the fact that, which I actually just recently learned about, is including the fact that the vintners cannot start picking their own grapes from their own vineyards till a particular date that it's given by the governing body that would tell them, okay, September X is the first day that you can stop picking. they can pick later, but they cannot start before that date. So with all the bubbles that they're trying to make perfection, tiny little ones, only certain amount of houses are the Grand Cru of the Champagne. We are going to explore 3 of the houses today, and we really try to concentrate on the 3 main grape varietals that are allowed in Champagne. There's actually 7 of them, but only 3 of them are the ones that are used on a regular basis. Only 0.3% of the other 5 are in production. So we're gonna start with the Louis Roeder, which is very popular mostly by their prestige cuvée Cristal. Then we're gonna do Renoir, and that's a Blanc de Blanc. And when Emma talks about it, you'll learn what that means. And then lastly, we would finish with Pinot Noir Champagne, which is Champagne Noir from Gosse. The first champagne we are pairing with Brillat Savarin, which is a triple cream cheese, probably a 40% overall fat with 70% fat with the crust. It's a wonderful.
I like it so much.
Yeah, so don't eat the crust. It's wonderful with baguette, and it will pair very well with almost any champagne, maybe not the rosé one, but any Blanc de Blanc or mixed grape champagnes. And then we are moving into actually an Austrian cheese from Alp. We just love the presentation, but it's also very creamy, which will pair very well with Blanc de Blanc. And lastly, something surprising. I'm beyond excited this is only a 3rd or 2nd week that we are getting the smoked salmon. And what makes it really special, it's cold smoked, which makes it very luxurious and very delicate and almost melts in your mouth. So this is it. This is the lineup, and I'll give the floor to Emma to talk about each of the champagnes.
Where'd she go?
Well, she just disappears.
They also make
here you are.
Fair premiere. Maybe that's what.
Hi, sorry about that. Okay, so a lot of great points. So first we'll start with what Claudia already mentioned, is that it can only be called champagne if it comes from the region in France. So if you find a domestic sparkling wine that has champagne on the label, it means that they've paid the hefty fine in order to put that on the label. So there's 3 main grapes: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. The first wine that we're going to enjoy this evening is the Rotorua Brut Premier, and it's a blend of all 3 of those grapes. So it's equal parts Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, 40%, 40%, and then 20% Pinot Meunier. Pinot Meunier is probably the rarest grape, even though it's included in one of the 3s. It's usually used as a blender and never, or very rarely, the predominant grape that you find in the bottle. So we're going to focus on 3 different champagne houses today, which means that it's an established winery and they may own vineyards, but for the most part, they source fruit from different vineyards throughout the region. And then bring all the grapes back to the house and then blend everything in the house. There is another style of champagne or grouping of champagne called grower champagne that we're not going to be enjoying tonight. But when you hear that terminology, it means that they grow the grapes on the same property that they make the actual wine. So those are a lot of fun and can be very unique and interesting and a little bit more experimental, where the houses like Rotorua Brut Premier, this is the house style of champagne. So what you're enjoying in your glass is multiple vintages married over time to define a house style. So you can have a glass of Rotorua Brut Premier 5 years ago, today, and 5 years in the future, and it's going to taste exactly the same every time. It's defined as the house The Cristal that Claudia mentioned is what we call a tête de cuvée. So it's the highest end wine that they make. It is always a vintage, and vintage champagne is only ever made in the best year. So the fruit has to be perfect. Part of the reason why you see a lot of non-vintage and house style champagnes is that every year the climate is very volatile. There can be some winters that are extremely cold, the frost comes early, and it's just too inconsistent. So they sort of blend things over time. And then on the best years, when all the stars are aligned and everything has worked out perfectly, that's when they choose to bottle the vintage. They also want the vintage to be different than any other year that it's been expressed before. So Rotorua also makes a Rosé Cristal, but that's even more rare because those grapes are even harder to grow, and usually Pinot Meunier dominant with a little bit of Pinot Noir blended in. So the Brut Premier style we like a lot. This is what we call like the Brix House Champagne, because like Claudia mentioned, it really offers the best, we think it's the best value for the quality that you get in the bottle. It's really delicate and elegant, and the reserve wines, still wines, are blended in over time. So just to touch back on sort of how champagne is made, it not only comes from the specific region, but it's a specific method called méthode champenoise. It wasn't defined in this particular region. The original sparkling wine actually comes from Limoux, which is on this in the southern side of France, and they define the Cremant style. So when you have a Cremant de Loire or Cremant de Limoux, Cremant de Alsace, Cremant de Burgundy, Bourgogne rather, those are made in the champagne style. They're just not from the particular region. So when we're talking about méthode champenoise, you're talking about two different fermentations. So they pick the grapes, press all the juice out, and then allow it to ferment a first time in tank or barrel. Then they bottle it with a little bit of yeast, and the secondary fermentation happens in the bottle. And that's where the bubbles come from. And as part of the way that champagne is so unbelievably special is because all of that is an organic process, as opposed to like a tank method, like Prosecco, for example, where the bubbles are pumped in to put into the wine after the fact. In champagne, the bubbles are naturally occurring. So if you've had, it's like the one way that I like to compare it for people is like mineral water versus like a sparkling water. So with the sparkling water, those bubbles are pumped in and they're a little bit bigger, a little bit more aggressive. Where if you have a mineral water, like a San Pellegrino, for example, very, very fine bubbles, you can taste the difference in the texture in your mouth, and it's just a more pleasant drinking experience overall. It just kind of depends on what you're eating, but there's a finesse and elegance to it that is just, it's unparalleled if you force it to happen. So the Rotorua Champagne House was established in 1776. They are synonymous with some of the best champagnes in the world, Cristal really leading the way for that. And they just seem to get better and better every year. So all of the wines, this is a Brut. All of the wines that we're going to taste today are made in Brut style, which means that it has a certain amount of sugar in the actual wine itself. So there's many different levels of champagne, Brut Nature being the driest of all, and then Demi-Sec being the sweetest out of all of them. There's Sec, but it's the very, very small amount. And so in each category, the amount of sugar increases. So for the most part, across the board, when you drink a champagne or a house style champagne, it's going to be Brut because it has a little bit of that sugar, but it's really supposed to be dry and fresh and pair well with a variety of different things.
Emma, when you said Cremant before, did you mean that the grapes don't come from Champagne?
Correct. So it's made in the same way that they make the wine in Champagne, but they can't put champagne on the bottle because it's not from the region. So Cremant is a really nice way, like there's a Jean-Francois Muriel Boulez is one that we work with a lot. It's a Cremant de Loire. It's a Chardonnay Chenin Blanc blend. It's absolutely beautiful, It's made in the same style as champagne, but it's a fraction of the price because it doesn't come from the region.
Could you tell the difference in the taste?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It
It's
depends.
also not only texture, but I think you can also taste the Chenin Blanc first of all.
Yeah.
And then it's, you know, forget even the bubbles and the texture, but the flavor itself is very different.
Yeah, because the Loire Valley, even though it's not that much further south in France, it's that much warmer. And so you really, the fruit really comes through a little more so than it will in Champagne.
Okay.
So did you like it?
Love it.
It's great.
Very nice.
It goes
Yeah,
down very well.
That's more of a typical, like we're talking about like typical rosés that would be from Provence. That would be like more of a typical champagne style, where the next one is definitely more opulent for sure.
Right. So when we were selecting the wines for this tasting, we were trying to, you know, it's a large region. There are many producers, but we really wanted to show you 3 different styles. So what is interesting about Ruinart is they're actually the first champagne house. They're not the first producer in Champagne. That's going to be the next one that we try. But they're the first champagne house. They were established in 1729, and they're in southern Champagne. So they focus on the Chardonnay grape. They believe that it really is what brings the most finesse to the resulting wine. So this is a Blanc de Blanc, which means that it's 100% Chardonnay. It doesn't have any other grapes blended into it. You're going to notice that it's like Claudia said, it's a little bit more opulent. You're going to have more of that round, soft fruit on the mid palate, a little bit more of that like toasty brioche. And what I always get from it is like a bouquet of white flowers like chamomile and honeysuckle and jasmine and just all of those delicate aromas and flavors blended in. This is one of my personal favorite champagnes to pair with oysters because I love the creaminess with the contrast of the brininess of the oysters and then the creaminess of the champagne together.
And that's why I thought that the cheese, even though from Austria, not from France, it's a very good complement, and vice versa, because it's extremely creamy and it also has the flowers. It's basically the whole wheel is covered with the wild flowers when it ages. So I think that's not only beautiful looking, but it kind of takes the hint of the flowers coming from that particular champagne.
It's beautiful.
What do you think? Very different, right?
Okay, we haven't tried it yet. We're gonna try it now.
Champagne's definitely one of those things you should sip.
Is
Really
champagne the only wine that has a specific date at which they can start picking the grapes?
Go ahead.
No, they're not the only region, but they're the most strict out of all of them.
Okay.
It's really, the law is there as an equalizer to help everybody compete sort
Ready?
of at the same time. To basically, I guess compete is probably not the right word, to sort of even the playing field so that the region is best represented as a collective first before
Okay.
represented individually.
Big the individual, yeah. It's the one more way to preserve the quality over quantity.
I think it'd be a 6-point resin beer.
Very different.
Yeah, it is.
Very different, right? Yeah.
Very different.
Very different.
Very different.
It's not often, this is actually a pretty special opportunity because it's not often, even for us, that you get to taste several different champagnes in a row and actually compare them. Because it's usually something where you open a bottle or you have, you have company over and you choose the same bottle and everybody sort of enjoys it at once. But it takes a well-trained palate to be able to like truly taste the differences and the nuance.
So, are some champagnes, especially older ones, just do you need food?
So I don't necessarily, I think Champagne is one of those regions where you don't necessarily need food. But I do think that as more often than not with wine, it only complements. So it's a really, it's perfect for the summertime. I think the classic pairing for me with Champagne is always shellfish. So any kind of shellfish, it's phenomenal with. I do really love a Blanc de Blanc with lobster as well. And cheeses are nice, but you really can enjoy it on its own.
So which of the champagnes are we supposed to use the potato chips with?
Good question.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
We're eating them right now.
This was a little touch. First of all, just in case you got, I don't know, I asked Sarah if Great Harbor Yacht Club has any caviar for you to purchase, just to make it very luxurious. I'm not sure if the answer was yes or no, but I did ask her to check and make it available. So thought that, if you do that caviar, most likely they might not have blinis, then caviar is fantastic on a very good potato chips, which is this one is that. And also is just to show that you don't have to have a perfect pairing that is established as a perfect pairing, meaning champagne and caviar, that you can enjoy champagne on a Monday or Tuesday, especially if you're in Nantucket and on vacation. And just if you have a quality of something that would go with it, it could be something like potato chips. I love caviar because I not grew up on it, but I was fairly readily available in Poland because we were right next to Russia. So it was fairly inexpensive. So obviously I try to treat myself as often as I can because I'm just used to it when I was growing up. But obviously I can't get it for that price right now. But having it on a potato chip is actually a treat. And I think snacking potato chips with the champagne is actually phenomenal. It's no different than if you're making a really, really good burger and you know what you're doing, having like the best bottle of Burgundy with it, red Burgundy.
Totally. I love champagne and popcorn for a movie night at home.
See, there you go.
Also, another great pairing is champagne and fried chicken.
Oh my God, that totally is.
That's an industry secret right there.
Yes, that's an industry
I
secret.
love it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now,
Champagne.
It's going to take the South by storm.
3 years ago, 3 or 4, something happened and Carrie's birthday got really changed, unexpected, or somebody was just coming from somewhere, I don't know. But the surprise was to go for fried chicken. And then because we have connections, we could call and say, hey, can I bring my own bottle of champagne? And we drank Cristal with the fried chicken. And it's like the best combination. Like you want the fat and the roundness of champagne. It's like beyond perfection with lobster, especially poached lobster in butter, or fried chicken or potato chips. So, and then the next champagne is a perfect pairing with charcuterie. And then the one that I told you about, Laurent Perrier Rosé, which you have to get a bottle, and then you also have to get one soon because you need to have leftover of what you're tasting on your palate and see how dramatically different it would be. Rosé champagnes in generally taste good with meats, but the Laurent Perrier Rosé, I think, is the quintessential pairing with a great charcuterie.
Yeah. So Laurent Perrier, their rosé, they're the only all Pinot Noir rosé in Champagne. It's one of our favorites. We have.
But this is the one that we don't taste, and in our
They don't sell it in half bottles, but they
They
should.
don't have it. We would have had it here for you because it's so unique, but they don't have it in half bottles.
But-
And it allows us to have kind of behind the scene laugh with Emma about our colleague that usually talks about everything else besides what's in front of.
Yeah.
In front of us. So what's in front of us is the Gosse, which is heavy on a Pinot Noir, and it hands the color.
What's interesting too about the contrast of Ruinart and Gosse is that even though Ruinart is the first champagne house, Gosse is actually the first producer in all of Champagne. They're the first winery in all of Champagne. So they produce still wine for many years, for almost 200 years before they started making champagne. So as she mentioned, this is, it's mostly Pinot Noir, and they put a little bit of Chardonnay in it to sort of soften it and make it a little bit creamier. It has really beautiful mousse and herbaceousness, and it's just a gorgeous expression of rosé. Even though Gosse is a champagne house, they are what we call like a micro production. So champagne houses make a lot of champagne. They pump it out, but including Rotorua. It doesn't mean that the quality goes down. They just make a lot of wine. Whereas Gosse, they make a very, very small amount of wine, even though they're a champagne house. They believe that, that they sort of take on more of a grower mentality. So they're actually the winemakers are in the vineyards and they're selecting the grapes and they're really paying attention from grape to bottle. And they're a little bit of a lesser known champagne house just because they don't produce a lot of the wine. But I think for quality, this is one of the best across the board. Carrie and I had an opportunity to taste everything that they made in the fall of last year. And it's unbelievable that like every bottle was almost better than the last, to the point at which we wanted to buy everything. But you can't, you have to be selective about it. And what I really like about this one is that even though it's a rosé, which tends to bring a little bit more fruit to the table, it's still very fresh and bright and has that herbaceous quality that Claudia mentioned is perfect with a charcuterie pairing. So just because it leans more towards the white category and the freshness doesn't necessarily mean that you can't pair this with something a little bit heartier. Because of the acidity in champagne, similar to what we were talking about with the potato chips and the fried chicken and the caviar, those are all rich foods. And that's why champagne is a perfect pairing for all of those things, because of the high acidity and just the freshness that comes across through the glass.
I always thought you pronounced this gossip.
You can say it however you want. I think it's technically Gosse.
Gosse.
No say.
So this is the bottle that
The Gosse.
is the original sort of antique shaped bottle that Ruinart sort of pays homage to as well, with the Blanc de Blanc. So it's a little bit more squat and wider. This is the traditional champagne bottle. They become a little bit more linear and burgundy-like as the years have gone on, but it's also, a little bit more visually.
So what do we think?
Wine country, what do you think?
We haven't tasted it yet. We're still savoring the second one, the Blanc de Blanc.
George, you gotta hurry up. This is too good to waste.
Thank goodness there have
We just want this to last a little bit longer, David.
It won't be wasted. It won't be wasted, David.
Well, you should have done what I did and went back and bought a second round.
That's
There
right.
you go.
Next time we'll set you up with the little mat, like we do our Bricks by Night tastings, and then you just need to have 4 different glasses, and you can go back and forth with them. That's a true tasting.
Claudia, do you normally have the half bottles of champagne in stock, or did you just get them for this?
Okay, George.
We just got them for you,
Okay.
Bring it on.
but it doesn't mean that
No,
if you want to. We have them right now because we have to buy it by the case.
Mhm.
So we have them right now, So if you would like to put some aside, I'll be happy to do it. And then also, you know, we can always get it for you if you want to just get like 3 half bottles or 6 half bottles. If we don't buy a case, then it's just a little bit of upcharge, but it's worth it. Also, they're great. Like, did you see the Renoir? Did you see what a gorgeous packaging it comes with?
Yes.
That's a great gift.
Well, I will see you tomorrow.
All right, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I think unless you're sharing with the group a half bottle of champagne is the perfect amount for 2 people. It's
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, love it, love it. And I actually talked to Carrie about it, and I said, you know what, maybe this year we actually will carry much more of the half bottles. People are so much entertaining in their own homes, which means that there is more ritual towards sitting down. They have more time. So the ritual is a cocktail hour, either a cocktail or a champagne. Then you move on to the first course. Doesn't mean that you know, obsessive with the quantities, but you nibble of something here and you pair it with something and you talk about it and you move on. So I think half bottles is gonna become a new trend. At least Bricks is gonna start one.
I think
I
it's
think, Claudia, especially with the champagnes, because people think, oh, I don't, you know, I only want half a bottle of champagne.
right. It's a commitment to buy.
Yeah, but to have, if you had cold little half bottles in your cooler,
Right.
I think
All
you can
right.
sell those.
They will walk out the door.
They will walk out the door.
Excellent. I'll get, when our big rosé bottles in Nantucket are, you know, thinning down and they on the bottom shelf, I'll just get a great silver champagne bucket and just put a bunch of half bottles. There you go.
Mm-hmm. So do the French tend to drink the rosé champagne during Christmas, or
I don't know.
you don't know? Okay.
I don't think it's a time of the year.
Yeah.
First of all, French do drink champagne more than average, definitely American. I would say Britain drinks a lot of champagne. And actually, one of the reasons that the winemakers in Champagne decided to conserve the bubbles and make wine with bubbles from champagne is because of the demand of the British. I think there was a mistake. The extra fermentation happened when the champagne was transported from France to Britain. It took a little bit longer and the weather was much warmer, and the champagne went through the second fermentation without even adding sugar to it. And when it reached the shores and Englishmen tasted that particular champagne, they liked it so much better that going forward, they requested to have the extra sparkle. So it goes, you know, as far as probably 17th or 16th century, and I think even now our tradition is still the same, where in Britain there is a huge consumption of champagne. I don't know if French drink more than Brits, but they one or the other, first or second place. And then and obviously sparkling wine, Prosecco is very popular in Italy, but it's mostly consumed in cocktails, in aperitivos, not necessarily as a single Prosecco. Then the Italians love their champagnes too. So if they do drink bubbles without any other adjectives, then they drink French champagne.
They also have French Accorta, which is their version of champagne.
Correct. About
I also believe the French, if you're invited to their house for dinner, you are offered champagne when you first get there.
because that's pretty much their aperitifs. They're not known for cocktails like
So
we
what I'm
do.
saying, it's not really for, you know how this in the States often, or it used to be that you had champagne for a special occasion, you know, like at a wedding or whatever. But the French is, you know, you're coming for dinner, you greet your
Right.
guests with a glass of champagne.
Yeah, it's not just celebration. It's whatever you feel like it. And
Yeah.
that's what I gave you potato chips to kind of level the field. So it's not just for special occasion. You can have it on Monday or Tuesday.
And in Britain,
Now we're gonna be able to buy it in a half bottle, so of course you're gonna
I
drink
think
it
it's
more
very
often.
festive and welcoming.
so in Britain, you have it for breakfast? Is that what
Yeah.
Churchill did?
That's what, Churchill had it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And what was his favorite champagne?
Paul Roger.
Roger.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Paul Roger,
Paul Roger.
which we do have it.
Hammond.
He liked
They
it.
actually, his favorite, or not favorite, but the one that he ordered the most, which was also the least expensive, because if you drink so much of it, I guess you have to buy the house champagne.
Economize.
Well, he was always in debt.
Yes, but he always recovered. So
He had wealthy friends.
He was
but
also a great writer.
he was a great man of many traits. And then actually the house of Paul Roger, when Winston Churchill died, they pulled a Tate Cuvée, so the highest level of their champagne. They pull everything out of the market and relabel all the champagne bottles black with his insignia to memorize his life and his death. And later on, where this Tate Cuvée was made, they decided they didn't keep it black. They changed, I think, to the dark blue. And it's still called Sir Winston Churchill.
Wow.
And if you want to look at it, you can look at both bottlings. The Tate Cuvée, Sir Winston Churchill, we have it on the shelf. We are very big fans. And then we also have the white label, which Churchill drank.
So where does Dom Perignon fit into this picture?
Well, that's very interesting. It kind of starts probably he died in 1700s. He actually was very monumental to the champagne business. He is associated with another person who was his maybe 30-year difference with changing a lot of wine practice for better in Champagne, mostly because they want to try to eliminate the bubbles. So they were experimenting to make the wine better and hopefully eliminate the bubbles. And then through that process and all the data coming from preferences, they're the ones who really were pioneering of the champagne that it is now, which is the quality wine from Champagne region that it's sparkling.
He's also a master blender. Like that's where his focus was. And you know, one of the largest contributions that he has to the region as a whole was he recognized that the grapes don't always sing on their own in individual vintages. And so how to blend them together to create that perfect balance. So Dom Perignon is the tete cuvée of the Moet Hennessy Champagne House. A lot of people don't know that because they just think Dom Perignon is its own thing.
It's on its own, but it's not, yes.
It's not. It's part
And
of
then going with the same thought of blending, he's the one who recognized the difference between those different parcels, those very small parcels, and he's the one who decided to pick them all separately and then continue with what Emma said, blending together and perfect that blending technique.
So is it considered sort of the creme de la creme of champagne?
No,
No.
No. No.
It's up there. It's in the Tête de Cuvée category, but I mean, Cristal is far superior, in my opinion.
Cristal is more superior. Okay.
Well, everybody will probably have their own opinion, but you know, you take opinions of people with a great palates, and they happen to agree. I think our team, and especially Carrie and Emma, have amazing palates, and we were, like she mentioned before, we very rarely taste amazing champagnes bottle next to bottle. And I want to say beginning of this year.
Yeah, that sounds
I
right.
think so. Beginning of this year. I could even tell you exactly the dates because we actually Instagrammed about it. We tasted a Tap Cuvée from Veuve Clicquot, which is La Grande Dame. We tasted Tap Cuvée from Dom Perignon, and then we tasted Tap Cuvée from Rotorua, which is Cristal. And we did not talk about it. We made our notes. So La Grande Dame, which is the Veuve Clicquot tap label, we actually do not even sell Veuve Clicquot we've been in business for 17 years. For 16 years, we do not sell yellow label of Veuve Clicquot, even though Boston had pretty large gay community, which was in love with the orange label. Nantucket, ever since we started here 7 years ago, was in love with Veuve Clicquot yellow label, even though we did not carry it. And the reason we didn't carry it, because it became a marketing machine. And it really did switch pretty much about 16, 15 years ago. And additionally, when you taste a Veuve Clicquot orange label in France, you taste it in United States, there is significant difference. And we learned then the house is actually adding extra sulfites to the wine. I don't know if that goes every single year, but when we were discussing it, it adds extra sulfite to the wine that is exported to the United States. And so consequently, for many reasons, we do not carry that. But going back to our tasting, we tasted the La Grande Dame. We were so underwhelmed. We just couldn't believe it that that's the Tap Cuvée from that house. We thought the Dom Perignon was very good, but again, good is not good enough if you're paying that much money. And then we tasted the Cristal, and we were like, okay, wow, all right, well, if you have the money, this is what I would drink. So it was tremendous difference. And in my opinion, if you're paying that much money, there should be all superlative. You might just prefer one over the other because of your taste preferences, no different than the champagnes that we just tasted now. You know, they're all very different. They're all excellent, but you might prefer one over the other for whatever reason.
A lot of it's personal taste.
This is the recommended cheese.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's true with wine in general, but what was interesting about tasting those Tête de Cuvées is that the Grande Dame had a weight to it. Like flabby is a word that we use a lot. It just kind of fell flat on the palate. Dom Perignon was nice, but it has a lot of fruit, and the bubbles to me are a little aggressive. Like it's delicious, but it's not a very pleasant drinking experience in comparison to the Cristal, where it's just delicate and layered, and each sip you take brings a new expression of the grapes. It's far superior for, if you're in that price point, not that much more money.
And you describe these as what, Tête Cuvée?
Tête de Cuvée. So it's two words. T-E-T-E is the first word. Cuvée, C-U-V-E-E. And
Well, Tête is head.
Yes. Yeah. Those
And
wines
then,
have a name associated.
and then another important thing is when we taste these wines with you, we thinking of you. We wanted to showcase during the tasting something different, and also combination of different champagnes and also different taste, and on the top of different taste, the different grape varietals. Where when we tasted something like the Tarte de Cuvée, we taste it from a perspective of a critic. We don't taste what we like most, or which is our preference. We have a different head on. So
How about Krug?
I love Krug. That is
Okay.
okay, so my favorite white champagne is Krug, and my favorite rosé champagne is Laurent Perrier Rosé. Billicard Salmon is very nice, but to me it's just very good rosé with bubbles. So I rather drink still rosé. If I want some experience, I would rather than drink the Gosse that we just had. It's interesting. Krug to me is, it's reminiscence to the stories that you learn about how the champagne first started to be made, where it had some bubbles and you can see that people want to maybe take them away. So to me, it's like a still wine with bubbles, opposed to really trying to produce a sparkling wine. I absolutely love it. And there, like Emma said before, a lot of houses are trying to have a house champagne, and for many reasons. One is for people to return because they like the flavor. So a lot of people don't want change, and that goes for life and it goes for wine.
Very true. Very true.
So
Particularly the life part.
Some people handle change better than others.
So all these vintage champagnes are very different, and you pay more money for them because they only happen every 3, 5, sometimes 10 years. Where the house champagne would be very, very different because it's always the same, exactly the same. Very similar, like if any of you are Scotch drinkers, you know, Macallan's 18 or 12 is always the same, where independent babblers always make it different because it's a different, it comes differently from the barrel. So going back to champagne, Krug is expensive vintage champagne like any other vintage champagnes, but Krug non-vintage or multi-vintage, what is the proper name, Emma?
Non-vintage.
Non-vintage. They actually hold the best year's juices and they blend it to accomplish the same taste.
It's in a category
to me,
of itself. Yeah.
It is, to me, it's incredible. And, you know, those vintage champagnes, they really, to have their value is what you spend for them. They, in my opinion, really need to age, unless you want to keep up with the Joneses and you need to bring a bottle of, you know, Cristal, Dom Perignon or such. Otherwise, I think then you're better off getting the grower champagne for 1/3 or half of the price, because the other ones really to showcase what they really are, they need to age. Where something that is non-vintage by the great house, it's going to be the same every year and it benefits from aging, but you would enjoy it when you buy it, when it's in the store. And especially Krug. Like, I absolutely love Krug. Krug will be the closest to the Renoir in a sense of opulent, but it will be much, much more elegant and a little bit less bubbly. Sorry for the long, exciting answer.
So how long would you put a vintage champagne down for?
At least 5 years.
Wow.
That's an investment.
After it's released, not the date on the bottle.
Say
What's
again?
that?
So it's after it's released, because the date on the bottle marks the year that the grapes were picked and the wine was made.
And it's released, what, a couple of years later?
A minimum of 3 years, but generally much longer than that. So
Okay.
like, for example, the most recent release of Cristal was the 2008.
Wow.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is Cristal released the 2009 before they released the 2008, because they felt that the 8 needed a little bit more time in cellar before it was ready to be released, and it got 100 points for the vintage. It was
So let me make sure I understood that. You're saying so you would you would start from not from the 2008 or 9, but from the release date.
Correct. And your wine shop Brix will be able to help you with that.
I don't doubt that.
You
So,
also want to hide it in like a cool, dark place. So if you don't have a wine refrigerator, and especially with champagne, it could not be more important with any other wine other than champagne. Cool, dark place. So keep it in its box, away from the light. That's why a lot of them come in a sort of a cellophane wrapping. And are in the box to shelter them from the light as much as possible. And you would just bury it in the back of the closet and just forget about it.
does it matter what temperature you keep it at?
I mean, you want to keep it at cellar temperature best as possible. So I think we talked
You're talking about 50 degrees you're talking about?
Yeah, so we talked about that a few tastings ago. So if you don't have a wine refrigerator, you want it at like an ambient temperature.
Okay.
And again, like, remember, temperature preserves something or ages something. So if you want to age it a little quickly, obviously not high heat, but then, 2 degrees higher, let's say, or 3 degrees higher temperature in the refrigerator would accelerate the aging. But it's still, the stillness of the temperature was also important. Again, not stillness of 80 degrees, but the stillness of, 54 opposed to 50.
Have some more, Mary Anna. You guys
So-
know about this.
All right, any more questions before we part?
So the non-vintage in general, how long will that last?
Oh, there's no difference between lasting of a great champagne of vintage or non-vintage. I mean, maybe some people would argue depending on the vintage. Depending on the vintage, some vintages might last longer. But for example, non-vintage, like 2002 Cristal was very, or 2005, I forget now. One of those years, 2002 or 2005 was very, 2003 was warm vintage, so it couldn't be 2002. So 2005 Cristal was literally ready. It tasted, when was released, like it already had 5 years on it. So it really depends on how the vintage was.
So I wouldn't, with a non-vintage, you're looking like 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
Probably be a good time frame.
And the same on the vintage then, because they're released later?
Again, that would be something that's sort of what she was saying, is it depends on the vintage. So
Okay.
we're happy to do the research for you. A lot of these wineries will have, the best years in which to drink. So
Right.
it's always good to turn back to the champagne house.
Okay.
But also it's a preference, especially it's a preference. Between those 5 and 10 years, it's a preference. I can tell you right now that I'll be drinking it closer to 5 years than 10, because I don't like when they become too mellow. I like the acidity. I like the intricacy between front, middle, and back palate. Where, there's some people that like when they really mature. Well, I get bored, so I don't like them that way.
Okay.
I think 5 years for champagne, 5-6 years is ideal in general terms.
Yeah.
Right. Well, these were delicious choices tonight.
They really were.
Thank you, Claudia.
And I would say you might consider the thought of, since this has all been done, well, I guess that's complicated. I guess you could give us well, that won't make sense. I was gonna say, could we do this through the winter? But I can't quite figure out how that's gonna work unless you.
Well, I mean, the first question is, where do you all live? Second question is, are you coming back for Thanksgiving or Christmas? All those.
Well, maybe stroll.
Sarah is going to send me emails of everyone that participated. And we can email you all, and then we can explore the possibilities.
I think that's a great idea.
So do you stay open all winter?
We have a seasonal license, so we have to be closed by January 15th.
Okay.
Usually we close, now when we have a great manager, Camila, we close right about then. Before, we would close literally day before Christmas, so I can go to Boston.
Right.
But yes, so we're planning to be open till we want to close January basically, and so So I don't know. Are you coming back for Thanksgiving or Christmas?
We don't know yet, but there's a decent chance we will.
Yeah. And where do you live?
Actually, most of us on the call live in Houston.
Okay.
Most of us, wouldn't that be everybody here?
Everybody here, but the Rosses have some guests. I don't know where they're from.
Oh.
No, this was terrific. You know, all three were great. For me, I thought all three were great. I loved the first one, but then I loved the second one more, and I loved the third one more than that. So
That's great.
I thought we had, how many we had?
You could do this during the winter.
How many, Sarah? How many we had? 5 altogether?
I think we did 5.
Yeah, 5. Great. Well, wonderful. It was great to host you. Thank you very much.
They were all excellent.
Thank you very
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah.
okay, thank you
Thank you very much.
for doing this.
That's